And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather again showing a couple of strong storms coming up. One coming up toward the North Gulf Coast, and that's spreading snow along this trough axis all the way up to the eastern Brooks Range there. Westward, moderate to heavy snow into the Susitna-Manuska Valley, Kenai Peninsula area down toward Homer. Heavy snow in the Copper River Basin tonight down into Prince William Sound with winter storm warnings there. High wind warnings out in areas of the southeast coast for winds gusting to 65 miles an hour with rain heavy at times as that front gets in close to the coast. And snow showers and cold out to the west with the coldest temperatures over the western and southwest interior. And for Monday, low pressure moves right up into south central Alaska for continued snow. Maybe starting to taper off in the afternoon, possibly snow into the central interior and areas of snow from the Brooks Range to the Arctic coast, snow in the Copper River Basin, but north of the Alaska Range, kind of a dry afternoon there, and rain and winds starting to diminish a little bit there as this front begins to weaken along the coastline. And then for Tuesday, improvement continues, but it doesn't dry out completely, or the precipitation doesn't end completely, but the winds really come down from what they'd been there for the Panhandle. And rain and snow showers, Yakutat to Cordova, snow showers, Prince William Sound. Colder temperatures coming back in across south central Alaska with a drying and clearing again as high pressure builds into the central interior. More snow and blowing snow move into the Pribilofs with a trough extending snow down to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula area. And for the coastal water forecast, we've got storm warnings out for the central coast of the Panhandle for south winds 50 gusting 65 knots. Otherwise, Prince of Wales Island, south 45 knots. North coast, south 40 to 45 knots. Really high seas here, anywhere from 30 to 40 feet. Clarence Strait, south winds 35 knots, 16-foot seas, south 30 to gusting 40 for Stevens Passage, and south 25 gusting 40 knots for Lynn Canal. And then lighter winds in store for Tuesday here. Still gales out of the southeast there for the Panhandle on the south coast at 35 knots. Small craft advisories on the central coast, southeast 25 to 30 knots, and east-northeast 15 to 20 on the north coast. Much lighter winds here over the inside waters, especially the northern and central inside waters, north at 15, Clarence Strait, southeast at 20. And for the North Gulf Coast tomorrow, as that low center lifts northward, winds will become west, decrease to gale force, west-southwest winds 30 to 35 knots, Prince William Sound, southeast winds 30 knots, seas 6 feet, south at 20 for northern Cook Inlet, and southwesterly gales developing for southern Cook Inlet there up to 35 knots. Storm warnings for Kamishak Bay, west winds 50 knots, 45 knot westerlies for the Barren Islands. And then for Tuesday, northwest 30 knots, Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, Cook Inlet, north winds 10 to 15 knots, and west at 15 with 2-foot seas for Prince William Sound, west-northwest winds 20 to 25 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Kodiak Island, west winds 40 to 45 knots tomorrow, seas 10 feet, north 25 for Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, northwesterlies 25 to 30 knots. And then for Tuesday, east winds at 15 knots for Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, west-southwesterlies 15 to 25 knots. Kodiak Island, west winds 20 knots, seas 9 feet. Eastern Aleutians, west-northwest winds tomorrow at 20 to 25 knots. Adak and Atka, west winds at 20 knots. And west-northwest winds 20 knots for the western Aleutians. And for Tuesday, north to northwest winds 15 knots out here for the western Aleutians. Adak and Atka, southwesterlies 20 to 25 knots. And the eastern Aleutians, small craft advisories, southwest winds 25 knots, seas 6 to 11 feet. And for the southwest coast, strongest winds again south of Nunivak Island out of the northwest at 25 knots. Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island north at 15. Norton Sound west at 15. Variable 15 for the Pribilofs and northeast 15 for St. Matthew Island. And for Tuesday, St. Lawrence Island, light east winds at 10 knots. And east-northeasterlies 15 knots for the southwest coast. Pribilofs west at 20 knots, seas at 10 feet. And northeast at 20 knots for St. Matthew Island. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, brisk wind advisories for east-northeast winds there at 25 to 30 knots, northeast at 25 knots for the central coast, and the west side northeast winds 20 to 25 knots in the Chukchi Sea. Brisk wind advisories for north to northeast winds at 25 to 30 knots. And then for Tuesday, much lighter wind shear for the Chukchi Sea, south to west at 10 to 15 knots. South to southwest, 10 to 15 knots for the western Arctic coast, southwest 15 for the central coast. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west-southwest winds 15 to 20 knots.